My name is Sarah. I am 29 years old and I live in Austin, Texas. And I want to tell you about the night my own mother stood in front of 60 people, family, friends, neighbors, people who had watched me grow up, and laughed at me. Not a nervous laugh, not an accident, a long, deliberate, comfortable laugh, the kind that told me she had been holding it in for years and had finally found the perfect audience to let it out. I was standing right there, in my good dress, holding a glass of sparkling water, smiling the way you smile when something hurts so much your face forgets what else to do. She said 4 words that I will never forget for the rest of my life, and the whole room went quiet. But here is the thing nobody expected, not her, not the 60 guests, not even me, not fully. I had one question ready, one quiet, simple question, and when I asked it, my mother didn't laugh anymore.
My name is Sarah. I am 29 years old and I live in Austin, Texas. But on the night I am about to tell you about, I was sitting in the passenger seat of my own car in the parking lot of the Riverside Events Hall on the edge of my hometown of Clarksville, Tennessee, trying to remember how to breathe. It was a Saturday in late October, one of those evenings where autumn had fully committed. The air was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that doesn't yet bite but reminds you it could. The trees lining the parking lot had gone amber and rust, and someone had strung warm white lights along the entrance canopy of the hall. And from the outside, everything looked the way a family celebration is supposed to look: warm, welcoming, safe. I sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard like it was the only honest thing in the world. 6:49, 6:50, 6:51. I had driven 4 hours from Austin to be here. I had taken 2 days off work, which at the time meant something real to me, a sacrifice I had quietly made without telling anyone. I had bought a new dress, deep burgundy, simple and clean. I had gotten my hair done. I had practiced in my own head during the long stretch of highway through central Texas and into Tennessee how I would carry myself when I walked through those doors, because I knew what was waiting inside. Not danger, not cruelty, not anything I could point to and name cleanly, just my family, and the particular kind of exhaustion that came with being around them. The event was my Aunt Patricia's 60th birthday party. Patricia, my mother's older sister, was one of those women who treated every birthday like a coronation. She had rented the hall 6 months in advance. She had a caterer, a DJ, a photo booth with props, and a slideshow of her life playing on a loop on a projector screen near the entrance. I had seen the invitation, which was printed on cream cardstock with gold lettering, and for a moment I had genuinely smiled, because Patricia, for all her theatrics, had always been kind to me. She remembered my birthday, she asked about my life with real curiosity. She was one of maybe 3 people in my extended family who said my name like it mattered. So I went. Of course I went. I finally got out of the car at 7 exactly, smoothed my dress, put my small gift bag over my wrist, and walked toward those warm white lights. The hall was already full when I stepped inside. 60 people, maybe a few more. Round tables draped in ivory linen, centerpieces of autumn flowers, orange dahlias and deep red roses, candles lit, glasses filled. The DJ was playing something soft in the background, an old Motown song, the kind that makes older relatives close their eyes and sway slightly without meaning to. The smell hit me first. Roasted chicken, garlic bread, something sweet from the dessert table along the back wall. It looked beautiful. I will say that honestly, even now.
I spotted my Aunt Patricia near the center of the room, radiant in a deep blue dress, laughing with a group of women I recognized as her friends from church. She saw me the moment I walked in, and her whole face opened up. "Sarah, baby!" She crossed the room with her arms already out. She hugged me the way people hug when they actually mean it. Both arms, a real squeeze, her cheek against mine. "You came all this way. Look at you. You look gorgeous." "Happy birthday, Aunt Pat," I said, and I meant it completely. She took my gift with both hands, squeezed my arm, and then leaned in close the way she always did when she had something private to say. "Your mama's over by the bar. Just be patient with her tonight, okay, honey? She's been in a mood since this morning." I nodded. I knew what that meant. I had been decoding that particular sentence my entire life. Be patient with her, which meant she is loaded and looking for a target, and you are the most familiar one. I made my rounds. I hugged cousins I hadn't seen in 2 years. I admired babies who had grown into toddlers. I talked football with my Uncle Ray, who didn't care about football but liked to talk as though he did. I ate a plate of food standing near the dessert table. The roasted chicken was genuinely excellent. And for a while, maybe 40 minutes, I managed to exist in that room without incident. And then I found my mother. Or rather, she found me. Her name is Dana. She is 54 years old, and she has worn the same perfume, a sharp floral that always arrived in a room before she did, for as long as I can remember. She was standing with a group of 5 or 6 women near the far end of the bar, her friends, her church group, a couple of neighbors from the street where I grew up, women who had known me since I was 7 years old, women who had watched me ride my bicycle on that street, who had given me Halloween candy, who had come to my high school graduation. My mother saw me approaching, and her expression did something complicated. Not unwelcoming exactly, but not warm either. It was the expression of someone who is trying to decide in real time what version of themselves to be. "Sarah," she air-kissed my cheek. "You made it." "Of course. Wouldn't miss Aunt Pat's birthday." "You look tired," she said. Not cruelly, just observationally, the way she always delivered the small cuts, wrapped in a tone of concern so you couldn't call them what they were. "Long drive," I said simply. One of the women, Linda, who had lived 3 houses down from us for 20 years, smiled at me warmly. "Sarah, my goodness, your mother was just telling us about you. Are you still doing that? What was it, Donna? The little online thing?" And there it was, the door cracking open. I saw my mother's expression shift, just slightly, a small private decision being made behind her eyes. "Oh, Sarah does her little social media thing," my mother said, and she waved her hand in a gesture I can only describe as a dismissal made physical. "You know, she makes videos, posts things online." She paused. She picked up her wine glass, and then she laughed. It wasn't a quick laugh. It wasn't embarrassed or accidental. It was slow, and it was comfortable, and it was clearly something she had said before to these women, or something very much like it, because 2 of them smiled in a way that suggested familiarity, like they had heard this bit already and were ready for the punchline. My mother continued, still in that light, laughing tone. "I keep telling her that it's not really a job, you know? It's more like a hobby that she's convinced herself is a career. I told her, 'Sarah, honey, you have a business degree. Use it. Get a real job, with benefits, with a desk.'" She smiled at the group, warm and conspiratorial. But you know how these young people are. The group laughed, not meanly, socially, the way people laugh at parties when the mood calls for it. But they laughed. And I stood there, in my burgundy dress, with my glass of sparkling water, and I felt something I had felt many times before in my life, but never quite so sharply, never quite so publicly. The specific humiliation of being reduced by the person who was supposed to know you best to a punchline at a party. 60 people in that room, several of them close to here. I did not cry. I want you to know that. I did not flush or stammer or make a scene. I smiled. I smiled the way I had learned to smile a long time ago, the smile that holds everything still while the inside does whatever it needs to do. And I waited. Because here's something nobody in that room knew about me, something my mother herself did not know, because she had never once asked, because asking would have required a kind of interest she had never extended to my life. She thought I posted videos online for fun. She thought the little social media thing was a hobby with delusions of grandeur. She had no idea, not even a shadow of an idea, what I had actually built in Austin over the past 4 years. And I had one question, one quiet, simple, completely devastating question. I let the laughter settle. I let the moment breathe. I let my mother take a sip of her wine, satisfied, comfortable in her audience. And then I looked at her, just her, directly, calmly, and I asked it. The room went quiet in a way that rooms do when something real just happened. And my mother stopped laughing. But before I tell you what I asked and what happened next, I need to take you back. Because you cannot understand that one question without understanding everything that came before it. You need to understand the house I grew up in. You need to understand what it felt like to bring home straight A's and be told, your brother does that too. You need to understand what it meant to win a full scholarship to college and have your mother's first response be, just don't forget where you came from. You need to understand the years, the quiet years, the years I spent building something in a city where no one knew my last name or my mother's opinion of me, and how those years became the most important years of my life. Because that question I asked, it didn't come from anger. It didn't come from a desire to embarrass her in front of her friends. It came from 4 years of silence and work and becoming someone my family didn't have the information to dismiss anymore. It came from the truth. And the truth, when you finally let it speak for itself, doesn't need to raise its voice. To understand why that laugh hurt the way it did, you have to come back with me. Not to that event hall with its ivory linens and amber flowers, not to the parking lot where I sat for 11 minutes trying to remember how to breathe. You have to come back to a yellow house on Sycamore Drive in Clarksville, Tennessee. A house with a cracked front step that my father always meant to fix and never did. A house that smelled like dryer sheets and coffee, and on Sunday mornings, the particular sweetness of my mother's blueberry pancakes, the one domestic ritual she performed with something close to love. I grew up in that house with 2 parents and 1 older brother. His name is Marcus. He is 4 years older than me, and from the earliest age I can form a memory, Marcus was the sun that our family orbited. I want to be fair about this because fairness matters to me, even now, even after everything. Marcus was not a bad person. He was charming and loud and funny, the kind of kid who filled a room just by entering it. Teachers liked him. Neighbors liked him. He had a wide, easy smile that my mother always said came from her side of the family, as though she had personally installed it. And my parents loved him in a way that I understood, even as a small child, was different from the way they loved me. Not that they didn't love me. I believed then, and I believe now, that they did, in whatever capacity they were capable of. But love, I learned early, comes in different volumes, and in our house, the volume was always turned up for Marcus. I remember the first time I understood this clearly. I was 8 years old, 2nd grade. My teacher, Mrs. Holloway, had assigned us a creative writing project. Write a short story about anything you wanted. I worked on mine for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of 8-year-old dedication, which I assure you is its own particular kind of intensity. I wrote a story about a girl who discovered a door in the back of her closet that led to an ocean made entirely of rain. I filled 6 pages in my careful looping handwriting. I drew illustrations in the margins with colored pencils. Mrs. Holloway read it in class, to the whole class, out loud. When she finished, she looked at me over the tops of her reading glasses and said, "Sarah, this is extraordinary. You have a real gift." I floated home that afternoon. Physically, I was walking the 4 blocks from school to our house, but internally, I was somewhere several feet above the sidewalk, warm and lit up and certain that this was a moment worth sharing. I burst through the front door, backpack still on, story clutched in both hands.
My mother was in the kitchen. Marcus was at the table doing homework, or pretending to. "Mama," I said, breathless, "Mrs. Holloway read my story out loud to the whole class. She said I have a real gift." My mother looked up from the stove. She looked at the pages in my hand. "That's nice, baby," she said, and then she looked at Marcus. "Marcus, did you finish that math worksheet? It's due tomorrow." That was it. "That's nice, baby." I stood there for a moment longer, still holding the story, the warmth from Mrs. Holloway's praise cooling slowly in the kitchen air. Then I went upstairs, put my story carefully in the drawer of my nightstand, and I did not take it out again. I was 8 years old, and I had already begun learning the lesson that would define my childhood. Some achievements are celebrated, and some are simply noted, and which category yours falls into depends on who you are in this family. Over the years, the pattern repeated with such consistency that it stopped surprising me and started shaping me. At 12, I won the regional spelling bee. Marcus had a baseball tournament the same weekend, and my parents went to his game. My Aunt Patricia drove me to the competition and cheered from the front row, and when I came home with the small trophy, my mother put it on the mantel, behind Marcus's baseball trophies, which were larger.
At 15, I made straight A's for the 4th consecutive semester. My father said, "Good, keep it up," and went back to the television. That same month, Marcus passed his driver's test on the 2nd attempt, and my parents took him out to his favorite steakhouse to celebrate. At 17, I was named to the National Honor Society. My mother's response, and I remember this precisely because I wrote it in my journal that night, was, "Make sure you keep your grades up. Don't let it go to your head." 2 weeks later, Marcus wrecked the family car drag racing on Route 9. He walked away without a scratch. My parents grounded him for 1 week, then spent the following weekend at the dealership helping him pick out a used Jeep so he would have his independence. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The girl who made straight A's and joined the Honor Society was told not to let it go to her head. The boy who wrecked the family car, street racing, got a Jeep. I am not telling you this to cast my parents as villains. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand the architecture of the world I grew up inside. The rules, the invisible, unspoken, absolute rules about whose success was celebrated and whose was expected, whose mistakes were forgiven and whose were warnings, whose future the family invested in and whose was assumed to handle itself. College was the clearest version of this truth. I applied to 7 schools. I got into 5. I received a full academic scholarship to the University of Tennessee. Tuition, room, board, the whole thing. Not a partial scholarship, not a loan, a full ride, based entirely on 4 years of work that my family had largely treated as unremarkable. I told my parents at dinner on a Tuesday night in March of my senior year. My father put down his fork. He looked genuinely pleased, the most unguarded positive reaction I had received from him in years. "Full scholarship, Sarah? That's real good. Your mother, you hear that?" My mother nodded. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Just don't forget where you came from." Not, "I'm so proud of you," not, "We always knew you could do it," not, "This is incredible, you worked so hard." Don't forget where you came from, as though success were a form of departure that required a warning. I smiled, said I won't, and ate the rest of my dinner. Across the table, Marcus, who had dropped out of community college the previous semester and was working variable hours at an auto parts store, said nothing. My mother refilled his glass of sweet tea without being asked. That summer, before I left for college, I made a quiet decision. I was sitting on the back porch one evening watching the fireflies start up in the yard, the way they did every July, and I thought very clearly and very deliberately about the life I was about to step into. I decided something that night that I have never fully articulated to anyone until now. I decided that I was done asking my family to celebrate me. Not in anger, not in bitterness, or at least not entirely, but in the simple, exhausted clarity of a 17-year-old girl who had spent a decade bringing her best things to people who consistently found somewhere else to look, and had finally run out of the energy required to keep trying. I would go to college. I would work.
I would build something, and I would stop measuring my progress by whether or not it earned a reaction in that yellow house on Sycamore Drive. I would become, quietly and completely, someone who did not need their applause. And I did. I left for Knoxville that August with 2 suitcases, a backpack, a laptop my Aunt Patricia had bought me as a going-away gift. She pressed the bag into my hands in the driveway and whispered, "Go be great, baby. I mean it." And the kind of focused, borderline ferocious determination that only forms in people who have had to find their own reasons to keep going. I majored in business. I minored in digital communications, which in 2013 was still considered by many people to be somewhat uncertain choice, the academic equivalent of saying you were majoring in daydreaming. My mother, on the one phone call where I mentioned it, said, "Just make sure you have something to fall back on." I did not tell her that I didn't plan on needing anything to fall back on. I did not tell her because she had not yet earned the right to that information. I made Dean's List every semester. I took on a part-time job as a social media manager for a small local restaurant, my first real taste of what I would eventually build, and discovered something that would quietly change the direction of everything. I was extraordinarily good at it. Not just competent, not just capable. I had an instinct for it, a way of understanding how content and audience and emotion intersected that my professors noticed and my clients felt immediately. By my junior year, I was managing social media for 7 small businesses in the Knoxville area. By my senior year, I had 12 clients and quietly registered my first LLC. I graduated with honors on a Saturday in May. My Aunt Patricia came. My parents did not. Marcus had a thing, some kind of thing. I was never given a complete explanation. And I stood in that gymnasium in my cap and gown, and I heard Patricia shouting from the stands, "That's my niece! That is my niece right there!" And I laughed, and I felt, for just a moment, completely and perfectly fine. I did not call my parents from the parking lot afterwards the way I had planned to. I got in my car. I drove to a diner near campus. I ordered a club sandwich and a slice of coconut cream pie, and I sat alone in a vinyl booth, and I thought about Austin, Texas, where I had already accepted a position at a digital marketing firm, where nobody knew my brother's name or my mother's opinion of me, where I could become whoever I was going to be without an audience that had already decided. I ate every bite of that pie, and then I drove toward the rest of my life.
Austin hit me like a second birth. I know that sounds dramatic, but when you have spent your entire life in a place where people have already decided who you are, where your name carries a history you didn't write, where every room you enter has a version of you already sitting in it, waiting, arriving somewhere that knows absolutely nothing about you feels like stepping out of a house that was always slightly too small, and finally being able to stand up straight. I moved into a studio apartment on the east side of Austin in late June. It was small, genuinely small, the kind of small where your kitchen and your living room have a conversation without trying. But it had a big window that faced west, and every evening the light came through it in long golden strips that fell across my desk. And I would sit there after work with my laptop and my notes and my growing list of ideas, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Possibility. Pure, uncomplicated, nobody else's opinion required possibility. The digital marketing firm where I worked was called Meridian Creative. 12 employees, scrappy and ambitious, the kind of company that gave young people real responsibility because they didn't have the budget not to. My manager, a sharp and direct woman named Carolyn Reed, pulled me aside at the end of my 3rd month and said something I still think about. She said, "Sarah, you have an unusual quality. You don't just understand what people want to see, you understand why they want to see it. That's rarer than you think. Don't waste it working for someone else forever." I thanked her. I went back to my desk and I opened a new document and started writing down every idea I had been storing in the back of my mind for the past 3 years. By the time I had been in Austin for 18 months, I had saved enough to make a move I had been planning carefully and quietly. I registered my second LLC, this one properly structured, with a business bank account, a contract template I had paid a lawyer to draft, and a genuine business plan. I called it Elevate Digital. Simple,
Clear. The name said exactly what I intended to do. I kept my job at Meridian during the day and built Elevate at night and on weekends. I was not reckless about it. I was methodical, the way I had always been methodical, the quality my family had always received as coldness, which was actually just discipline. I onboarded clients carefully. I delivered results before I promised them. I let the work speak before I let myself speak. Within 8 months of launching Elevate Digital, I had 10 clients. Within 14 months, I had 22. Within 2 years, I had left Meridian on excellent terms with Carolyn's full blessing and a referral that brought me 3 new clients and was running Elevate Digital full-time from a proper office space I rented in a building near downtown Austin, a bright room with exposed brick walls and a standing desk, and a small team of 3 contractors who helped me manage the growing workload. I want to pause here and be honest about something because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering in a story like this. It was not easy. I am not going to romanticize it into a highlight reel. There were months where cash flow was terrifying, where I lay awake at 2 a.m. running numbers in my head that didn't quite add up. There were clients who were difficult, contracts that fell through, campaigns that underperformed and required uncomfortable conversations. There were Friday evenings where my friends were out and I was at my desk, alone, rechecking analytics reports and wondering, briefly, if Carolyn had overestimated me. But I kept going, because stopping had never been an option I seriously entertained. When you have grown up being the person whose achievements go unnoticed, you develop a very particular relationship with your own motivation. You learn to generate it entirely from the inside, because you have never been able to rely on it coming from anywhere else. And that, in the end, is its own kind of superpower. By my 4th year in Austin, Elevate Digital had grown into something I could no longer describe as a small operation with a straight face. We had 19 full or part-time staff. We were managing social media, content strategy, and digital campaigns for over 60 clients across Texas, Tennessee, Georgia, and Colorado. Our annual revenue had crossed a number that I still sometimes look at on a spreadsheet and feel a quiet disbelief about. Not because I don't believe I built it, but because I remember so clearly the woman who drove to Austin with 2 suitcases and a west-facing window and a list of ideas, and the distance between her and here still feels astonishing sometimes. I had also, in my 3rd year, bought my first property, a townhouse in a quiet neighborhood 15 minutes from downtown Austin. Hardwood floors, a small garden in the back that I was slowly learning to keep alive, a kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook in. I paid a down payment I had saved entirely myself. I signed the papers alone in a real estate attorney's office on a Tuesday afternoon, and when I walked out onto the street afterward, I stood in the October sunlight for a real long moment and thought about that yellow house on Sycamore Drive and the cracked front step that never got fixed. I thought about being 8 years old with a story about an ocean made of rain, standing in the kitchen doorway waiting to be seen. I thought about Aunt Patricia pressing a laptop bag into my hands in the driveway and whispering, "Go be great." I had not called my parents to tell them about any of this. Not the business, not the team, not the townhouse, not the revenue, the clients, the growth, any of it. Not because I was hiding it in any calculated way, not yet, but because they had never asked. In 4 years of living in Austin, my mother had called me 41 times. I know this because I'm the kind of person who notices patterns, and I noticed this one. Of those 41 calls, 37 of them were about something related to Marcus. Marcus needed money for a car repair. Marcus was having trouble with his landlord. Marcus had started a new business, a mobile car detailing service he had started with a loan she and my father had co-signed. Marcus had broken up with his girlfriend and was struggling. Marcus had gotten back together with his girlfriend and they were having a party. The remaining 4 calls were holidays: Christmas, Easter, her birthday, mine. On my birthday call, the year I turned 28, she spoke for 6 minutes. In the first 4 minutes, she told me about Marcus's latest venture, a mobile car detailing service he had started with a loan she and my father had co-signed. In the last 2 minutes, she said happy birthday, asked if I was seeing anyone, said that's nice when I said I was focused on work, and told me to drive safe. She did not ask what work was. She did not ask what I was focused on. She did not ask about Austin or the business or the team or the townhouse or any detail of my actual life, because my actual life had never been the subject she called to discuss. I was the audience for the Marcus updates. That was my role. That had always been my role. And so I played it. I said the right things, I got off the phone, I went back to my desk, to my work, to the life I was building in the spaces my family had left empty. There is something I have thought about often since that night at Aunt Patricia's birthday party, something I have turned over carefully, the way you turn over a stone to see what lives underneath. My mother did not know what I had built because she had never asked, and I had never told her because she had never asked. And she had never asked because somewhere along the way in that yellow house on Sycamore Drive, she had formed a complete and settled opinion of what I was capable of, an opinion based on the daughter she thought she knew, the quiet one, the expected one, the one whose straight A's were routine and whose full scholarship was a warning about forgetting where she came from. And she had carried that opinion forward with her, unchanged and unexamined, into a banquet hall in late October where 60 people were eating roasted chicken and listening to Motown. She laughed at my job in front of those 60 people because she genuinely believed she knew what my job was. She had no idea. And in about 20 minutes, she was going to find out. But first, I need to tell you about the phone call I received 3 weeks before that party, because that phone call changed the shape of the evening. It changed what I was walking into that hall carrying and what I was capable of asking when the moment came. It was a Tuesday. I was at my desk in Austin reviewing a campaign proposal when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize, a Tennessee area code. I almost didn't answer. I answered. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" A man's voice, professional, measured. "Yes," I said. "Miss Mitchell, my name is Robert Hale. I'm an attorney in Clarksville. I'm calling regarding the estate of your grandmother, Dorothy Jean Mitchell." I sat very still. My grandmother Dorothy had passed 8 months earlier, quietly and at home the way she lived, with minimum fuss and maximum dignity. She was 81 years old and sharp until the very end, the kind of woman who did the crossword in pen and remembered your birthday without checking her phone. She was my father's mother, and she and I shared a quiet and particular closeness built on Sunday afternoon phone calls and her habit of sending me handwritten letters, actual letters in envelopes with stamps, throughout my college years. I had grieved her privately and deeply. I drove to Clarksville for her funeral, sat in the third pew, cried in the car on the way home. "Miss Mitchell," the attorney continued, "your grandmother left specific instructions regarding a portion of her estate. She asked that it be held in a structured trust for 8 months following her passing before being distributed. That period concludes this month. I'd like to arrange a time to meet with you." I was quiet for a long moment. "What portion of the estate?" I asked. He told me. I put the phone down afterward, and I sat at my standing desk in my Austin office with the exposed brick walls, and I looked out the window for a very long time. My grandmother had seen me, all along, through the letters and the Sunday calls, through the quiet and careful attention she paid to my actual life. She had seen me, and she had made sure that I would know it.
3 days before Aunt Patricia's birthday party, my mother called. It was a Wednesday evening. I was in my kitchen making pasta. Simple weeknight pasta, garlic and olive oil, the kind of meal that requires just enough attention to be meditative, when my phone buzzed on the counter and her name appeared on the screen. I dried my hands. I answered. "Sarah?" Her voice had that particular quality it got when she was building towards something, a brightness that was slightly too bright, a warmth that was doing a job. "Hi, Mama. You're coming Saturday, right? Patricia's party?" "Yes, I already told Aunt Pat. I'll be there." "Good, good." A pause. The kind of pause that isn't a pause, but a preparation. "Listen, honey, while I have you, I wanted to talk to you about something. About Marcus." I turned the burner down to low. Of course. Of course it was about Marcus. Here is what my mother told me, in the carefully managed version she delivered that Wednesday evening, a version I would later understand had been edited for maximum sympathy and minimum accountability. Marcus's mobile car detailing business, the one my parents had co-signed a loan for 18 months ago, had failed. Not struggled, failed. Fully and completely with debt attached. The loan my parents had co-signed was $47,000. There was also a separate equipment lease Marcus had signed personally that he had fallen behind on, totaling another $18,000. And there were, my mother's voice got quieter here, softer, the way it did when she was delivering information she knew was objectively indefensible. There were some credit cards. Marcus had opened several credit cards in the months after the business launched to cover operational costs, and the combined balance across those cards was somewhere in the region of $31,000. Total, approximately $96,000 in debt. My parents, who had co-signed the primary loan, were being contacted by creditors. My father was 61 years old and had a heart condition. My mother said the stress was affecting him. She said his doctor had told him to avoid financial anxiety. She said this clearly and deliberately, the way you deploy information you know has weight. And then she said, "We were hoping you might be able to help, Sarah. Just whatever you can do. You're doing so well down there in Austin." I stood in my kitchen with the garlic beginning to brown slightly at the edges, and I felt the full, familiar architecture of what was happening. The story had been shaped. The vulnerability had been positioned. The comparison, "you're doing so well," had been inserted not as a compliment, but as a lever. "How much are you asking me for, Mama?" I said. My voice was level. I had learned to keep it level. A pause. "Well, we thought if you could take on the loan we co-signed, that would be the most urgent thing. The $47,000. And the rest?" I said. "We thought maybe between us, you and me and your daddy, we could work out the cards and the equipment thing, over time." I did a very fast calculation in my head, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to be precise when I said it. "Mama, you're asking me for close to $100,000. Not all at once. In total," I said, "you're asking me to absorb close to $100,000 of debt that Marcus created." Silence. "He's your brother, Sarah." "I know who he is." "Your daddy's health." "I hear you," I said. "I'm not going to decide anything on a phone on a Wednesday night. Let me think." I got off the call. I turned the burner off. I stood in my kitchen for a long time without eating anything. I want to tell you what I was actually thinking in those minutes because it matters. I was not thinking about the money, not primarily. I had, since the attorney's call 3 weeks earlier, a significantly changed financial picture. My grandmother's trust, combined with what I had already built, meant that $47,000 was not an abstract impossibility for me. It would hurt. It would be a real and significant withdrawal from plans I had made, but it was not impossible. That was not what was keeping me standing in my kitchen in silence. What I was thinking about was this: credit card, take on lease obligations, make decision after decision that any financially literate person could see was heading toward collapse, and they had said nothing. They had not called me when the business started struggling. They had not asked for advice or input or even a conversation. They had called me now, when the number was $96,000 and the creditors were calling and my father's health was being placed on the table like a bargaining chip. And in 3 days, I would be standing in a banquet hall in Clarksville, and my mother would be there, and I had not yet decided what version of myself to bring into that room. I went to that party carrying 2 things nobody in that room knew about. I carried the knowledge of what my grandmother had left me, not just the money, but the letter. The letter Dorothy Jean Mitchell had written in her careful, old-fashioned cursive, which the attorney had handed me in a cream envelope and which I had read 4 times, and which I kept in the drawer of my nightstand in Austin, next to a 6-page story about an ocean made of rain. In that letter, my grandmother had written many things, but the line I kept returning to, the line I had practically memorized, was this: "Sarah, my darling, I have watched you build yourself from scratch your entire life, and I want you to know that I saw every single thing you did, every single one. I am more proud of you than I have ever known how to say. Don't let anyone make you small. You were never small." I carried that into the banquet hall. And I carried the other thing, the thing I had decided, quietly and finally, somewhere between my kitchen and the highway out of Austin on Saturday morning. I had decided I was done being managed, done being shaped into a smaller, more convenient version of myself for the comfort of people who had never invested a single moment in understanding who I actually was. I was not going in angry. I was not going in looking for a fight, but I was going in as myself, fully, for the first time, and if someone pointed a laugh at me in a room full of 60 people, I was going to be ready. Let me take you back to exactly where we were. My mother standing near the bar in the Riverside Events Hall, wineglass in hand, surrounded by 5 women who had known me since I was 7 years old. Me in my burgundy dress, sparkling water in hand, smile in place, and her laugh, that slow, comfortable, practiced laugh, settling over the group like something she had rehearsed. Oh, Sarah does her little social media thing. She makes videos, posts things online. I keep telling her it's not really a job. It's more like a hobby she's convinced herself is a career. The group laughed, socially, warmly, the way people laugh at parties. I stood there and let it land. Let it finish. Let the silence that followed it stretch just long enough to become its own kind of statement. And then I looked directly at my mother. Not at the group, not at the room, just at her. And I asked the question. I said very quietly, very clearly, "Mama, how much did Marcus's detailing business make in its best year?" The silence was immediate, not the polite, momentary silence of a room recalibrating after a joke. A real silence, the kind that has weight. My mother's smile did something complicated. It didn't disappear right away. Smiles don't. When they've been in place, they take a moment to understand they're no longer appropriate. But it shifted, changed shape, became uncertain. "What?" she said. "His detailing business," I said, "in its best year. What did it bring in?" She looked at the women beside her. A reflex, looking for the audience that had been with her a moment ago. But the audience had shifted. They were looking at me now. "I don't see what that has to—" Elevate Digital. That's the name of my company. I founded it 4 years ago in Austin. We currently have 19 staff members. I paused just briefly. Last year, we managed digital campaigns for 63 clients across 4 states. The woman named Linda, 3 houses down, 20 years, Halloween candy, was looking at me with her lips slightly parted. "I'm not saying this to brag," I said, and I meant it. I was not performing. I was not getting revenge in the theatrical sense. I was simply, for the first time in a room full of people who thought they knew me, telling the truth. My mother was quiet. My 5 women beside her were quiet. Somewhere behind us, the DJ had transitioned to something slower, a Stevie Wonder song, and a few couples had moved to the small dance floor, and the rest of the party continued its warm, candle-lit existence, unaware. But in our small corner of the room, something had stopped moving.
My mother recovered. I will give her that. She had spent 54 years being the most composed person in any room she was in, and that skill does not disappear in a moment.
She straightened slightly. She picked her wine glass back up. She gave a small, careful smile to the women beside her. A smile that was attempting to reframe what had just happened as an overreaction on my part, a daughter being sensitive, a minor scene at a party. "Well," she said, with a light laugh that did not reach her eyes, "I didn't know all that. You never tell me anything about your life down there." And there it was. The reframe. Clean and practiced and delivered in the same tone she used for everything. Bright, warm, slightly wounded. "You never tell me anything." As though the information gap were my failure. As though she had been asking, waiting, reaching, and I had been withholding. As though the dozens of phone calls about Marcus's ventures had been generously balanced by equal interest in mine, and I had simply declined to participate. I looked at her for a long moment. "You're right," I said. "I don't. And I think we both know why." I did not say it with heat. I did not say it as an accusation designed to draw blood in public. I said it the way you state a fact that has been true for a long time and that everyone in earshot privately recognizes. The women beside my mother, Linda and the church friends and the neighbors, were doing that thing people do when they are witnessing something more real than they expected and don't know where to put their eyes. My mother said nothing. Aunt Patricia appeared at my elbow. She had impeccable timing, always had, and I would later wonder whether she had been watching from across the room, whether she had seen the shape of what was happening and moved toward it with the particular grace of a woman who has spent 60 years knowing exactly when to intervene. "Sarah, baby," she said, looping her arm through mine, "I need you to come meet someone. One of my oldest friends has been asking about you all night." She looked at the group with a warm, perfectly composed smile. "You'll excuse us, ladies." She steered me away from the bar, through the room, toward the dance floor side where the light was warmer and the music was fuller. She didn't say anything for a moment. We just walked, her arm in mine. Then, quietly, close to my ear, "That was handled beautifully." I wasn't trying to make a scene. "I know," she said. "That's what made it beautiful." I spent the next hour circulating through the party with a lightness I had not expected to feel. Not triumph, exactly, not the hot, satisfying flush of a revenge fantasy realized, something quieter than that, something more like relief, the specific relief of having told the truth in a room where a comfortable lie had been living for a long time. I talked to cousins. I danced once, briefly, with an Earth, Wind, and Fire song with my Uncle Ray, who, despite his fake interest in football, was a genuinely excellent dancer. I ate a piece of Patricia's birthday cake, which was lemon with raspberry filling and was extraordinary. And across the room, periodically, I was aware of my mother. She had moved to a different group. She was laughing, talking, performing the role of composed and gracious party guest with her usual proficiency. But twice, across the room, our eyes met, and both times she looked away first. That had never happened before. In 34 years of that yellow house and the cracked front step and the birthday calls that lasted 6 minutes and the Marcus updates and the "don't let it go to your head" and the "don't forget where you came from" and the laugh in front of 60 people, she had never been the one to look away first. I held that quietly, privately, like something I had been given without expecting it. On the drive home, 4 hours, dark highway, the amber trees long since invisible in the October night, I thought about what came next, because the question had been asked and the room had gone quiet and my mother had looked away first. But none of the real conversations had happened yet. The one about the debt was still waiting. The one about us, about what we were, what we had been, what we might possibly become, was still waiting. And there was something else, something I had decided on the highway to Clarksville that morning, something beyond the question and the evening and the silence. I had decided it was time to stop being invisible to my own family. Not loudly, not angrily, but completely and permanently. The morning after Patricia's party, I woke up in my childhood bedroom. My mother had offered when things settled and the party ended, and I had accepted because it was midnight and the drive back to Austin was 4 hours, and I was tired in a way that went deeper than the physical. The room was exactly as I had left it at 17. Same pale blue walls, same white dresser, same window overlooking the backyard where the fireflies came in July. Someone had put a different bedspread on the bed, a beige quilted thing that didn't belong to my memory of the room, and that small difference felt symbolic in a way I was too tired to fully examine. I lay there in the early morning, the house quiet around me, and I looked at the ceiling and thought about everything. The party, the laugh, the question, my mother's face when the smile went uncertain, Aunt Patricia's arm in mine. That was handled beautifully, and the conversation that was still coming. My mother was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She was making coffee. Real coffee, the percolated kind she had made every morning of my life, the smell of it so specific to that house that it hit me somewhere below conscious thought, something purely physical and involuntary. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She poured a cup without asking and set it on the table. I sat down. She sat across from me. For a moment, we were just two people at a kitchen table, which was the simplest and most complicated thing we had ever been. "Your father's at his appointment. Cardiology. Routine. How is he doing?" "Okay. Better than last month." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Sarah, about last night." "Mama." "Let me say it," she said. Not sharply, quietly, with a directness I didn't often hear from her. "I was unkind. In front of people. That wasn't right." I looked at her. In 54 years, my mother had issued a small number of genuine apologies. I could count them. This felt like it was reaching for being one. "I appreciate that," I said. She nodded. Another pause. Then, "I really didn't know. About your company. About all of it." "I know you didn't," I said. "But Mama, I need you to hear something. The reason you didn't know isn't because I was hiding it. It's because you never asked. In 4 years, you have never asked me what I'm working on, what I've built, how I'm doing, not the checked box version, but actually." She was quiet. "I said, every time you called, it was about Marcus, the business, the loan, the girlfriend, the next thing. I was always the audience for that conversation, never the subject." Her hands moved slightly around her mug. "That's not," she started. "It is," I said, gently, without cruelty. "I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it because if we're going to have a different conversation than the one we've been having for 30 years, we have to start from the truth." She was quiet for a long time. Outside the kitchen window, the backyard was gray and still, the trees stripped nearly bare now, a single cardinal on the fence doing what cardinals do, being impossibly red against the colorless morning. My mother said finally, and the way she said it, slowly, like someone lifting something heavy, told me she had known this for longer than she had ever admitted. "I know I've been harder on you," my mother said. "I know I have. I always thought you were so capable, so self-sufficient. You didn't seem to need—" "Everyone needs it, Mama. That's not how it works. Capability isn't the same as not needing to be seen." She looked at me then. Really looked at me, with the kind of attention she had directed at Marcus 1,000 times and at me almost never, and it landed with a weight I had not fully prepared for. Her eyes went bright. She did not cry. She pressed her lips together, and she did not cry. "I'm sorry, Sarah." 2 words, 1,000 days overdue. I need to tell you now about the letter. I had brought it with me. The letter from my grandmother, the cream envelope, the careful cursive. I don't entirely know why I brought it. Some instinct, some sense that this weekend was going to require things I couldn't fully predict. I took it out of my bag and I put it on the kitchen table between us. My mother looked at the handwriting on the front, her own mother-in-law's hand, a woman she had known for 30 years, a woman now 8 months gone. "Grandma Dorothy left me a letter," I said, "with the attorney. It was held in trust." I paused. "She left me some money, Mama, a significant amount, and she wrote me this." My mother looked at the envelope but did not touch it, as though it were something that deserved that kind of respect. "I'm not telling you this to hold it over anyone," I said. "I'm telling you because I think you should know that someone in this family saw me all along. She saw me and she made sure I knew it." My mother was quiet for a long time. "She always adored you," she said softly. "Dorothy. She used to say you reminded her of herself." "She wrote me letters," I said, "through all college. Did you know that?" She shook her head, slowly. "Every month, almost. Real letters, in envelopes." I paused. She asked about my classes, my work, my ideas. She remembered details from the previous letter and asked follow-up questions. I looked at my mother steadily. "She was interested in my life, Mama. She was genuinely interested." The cardinal outside the window flew away. The yard was empty. "I didn't know," my mother said. "I know you didn't," I said. Then I told her about the debt, not as a response to her earlier request, that call, that Wednesday evening version of events, but as a genuine conversation, honest and complete. I told her I knew the full number, all of it, not just the $47,000 she had led with. I told her I understood my father's health was a real concern, and I took it seriously. And then I told her my answer. "I'm not going to pay Marcus's debt," I said. "I want to be clear about that, and I want to be clear about why. Not because I can't, and not because I don't love this family, but because paying it would teach exactly the wrong lesson to everyone involved, including Marcus. It would tell him that there is no real consequence to the decisions he makes, and it would tell you and Daddy that I am available to be the solution whenever the choices other people make become a crisis." My mother opened her mouth. "Let me finish," I said gently. "What I will do, because I love you and because Daddy's health matters to me, is help you find a debt consolidation attorney. I know people. I will pay for that consultation. I will help you understand your options, but the debt itself is not mine to carry." Silence in the kitchen, the coffee cooling in both our mugs. "He's your brother," she said, quietly. Not the weaponized version from the phone call, just a fact, a tired, true, complicated fact. "I know," I said, "and I hope he figures it out. I genuinely do. But I have spent my whole life being responsible for things I didn't create in this family. I'm done with that part." My mother looked at her hands. "Okay," she said, after a long, long moment. "Okay, Sarah." It was not acceptance fully, it was not understanding completely, but it was the beginning of a door opening slowly in a wall that had been solid for 30 years. And for now, for this kitchen, for this gray October morning with the empty yard outside, it was enough. 2 months after Patricia's party, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening. It was not about Marcus. She called to tell me that she had found a recipe for the blueberry pancakes, the Sunday morning ones from my childhood, and she had written it down for me because she thought I might want it. She said she had realized she had never given it to me and she didn't know why, because it was the kind of thing a mother should give a daughter. It was such a small thing. It was enormous. I sat in my Austin kitchen with my phone pressed to my ear, and I wrote down the recipe on the back of an envelope while she read it to me. And at the end, she said, "How's the business going?" Just like that. Simple and direct. How's the business going? And something in my chest that had been held in a particular tightened position for a very long time released, almost imperceptibly, like a knot worked loose by patient hands. "It's going really well, Mama," I said. "Tell me something about it," she said. So I did. The months that followed Aunt Patricia's birthday were not a fairy tale transformation. I want to be honest with you about that, the way I have been honest about everything else in this story. My mother did not suddenly become a different person. Patterns that are decades old do not dissolve in a single kitchen conversation, however true and however necessary. There were still moments, phone calls that drifted back toward Marcus, comments that landed slightly sideways, the occasional unconscious reversion to the old dynamic. She was a woman of 54 years of habit, and I was a woman of 29 years of patience. And we were both learning in real time what the new version of us was supposed to look like. But she was trying. That was real. I could feel the effort in it. Genuine effort. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that requires a person to look at themselves with more honesty than is comfortable. And I respected it, the way I respected any hard work. My father was slower to change. He was a man of very few words in the best circumstances, and was not, by nature or by practice, someone who processed things out loud. But one evening in December, 2 months after the party, he called me. He almost never called. It was always my mother who called. And he said, "Your Aunt Patricia showed me something, an article about your company, online." He paused in the way he paused, long and considered. "It was impressive, Sarah. You've done something real there." 5 sentences. My father. I told him thank you. I told him it meant something. He said good, and we talked for 11 minutes about nothing in particular. His cardiology numbers, my neighborhood in Austin, whether I thought the Titans had any hope this season, and it was the best phone call we had ever had. In January, I went back to Clarksville for a weekend. Not for a crisis, not for a demand, just a visit. The first one in years that had been arranged without a subtext. I stayed in my childhood room with the pale blue walls. I made coffee in the mornings and sat with my mother at the kitchen table, and she asked questions, real questions, about the business, about Austin, about what I was working on. I told her about a campaign we had just launched for a nonprofit in Colorado that I was particularly proud of. She listened, actually listened, with the focused attention she had always given Marcus and now had, haltingly but genuinely, begun to extend to me. On Saturday afternoon, my father drove me past a piece of land outside of town, 20 acres. Rolling and quiet, a creek running along the eastern edge that had recently gone on the market. "I remember you used to talk about having land someday," he said. Just that. I looked out the window at those 20 acres, and I thought about the woman who had driven to Austin with 2 suitcases and a list of ideas, and I thought about what my grandmother had written to me. "You were never small." And I thought about the question I had asked in a banquet hall in October that had finally let the truth into the room. "Yeah," I said, "I still think about that." "You could do it," my father said, matter-of-factly, the way he said everything, "if you wanted." It was the most he had ever said. Marcus called me in February. Not my mother calling about Marcus, Marcus himself. Directly, for the first time in what I calculated was almost a year. He said he wanted to talk. I said, okay. He said he had heard from my mother, from Aunt Patricia, from apparently several people at that October party who had gone home and looked up Elevate Digital, that my company was something more than he had understood. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," I said. "Mom said..." He stopped. Started again. "Mom told me about the debt conversation, what you said, about paying for the attorney but not the debt." "Yes." I think... Another stop. My brother was not, historically, someone who found these words easily. I think that was fair. I think I've leaned on this family in ways I shouldn't have. On you specifically, even when you weren't in the room. I was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do about it?" I asked. "I'm working with the attorney you found. I'm taking on some contract work. Slowly." He paused.
I got a job offer. Actual W-2 employment, project management for a construction company. I think I'm going to take it. That sounds like a good idea, I said. Sarah, his voice changed, became something younger, something that sounded more like the brother I had grown up alongside before the favoritism and the Jeep and the distance had built their various walls. I'm sorry for a lot of it. I knew things weren't equal when we were growing up. I think I knew, and I let it happen because it benefited me. That wasn't right. I took a long breath. I appreciate you saying that, Marcus. I genuinely do. Are we okay? He asked. I thought about it honestly, because Marcus deserved honesty more than he deserved comfort in that moment. We're at the beginning of okay. That's a real place to start from. He laughed, a short, genuine laugh, and said, Yeah, fair enough. In March, I flee to Denver to close on a property. Not the Clarksville land, that was still a someday, a dream I was holding at a comfortable distance. This was a small ranch property 40 minutes outside Denver that I had been watching for 2 years, a place I had driven past on a business trip and photographed through the car window with a feeling I had learned to trust, the feeling of something that belongs to you before you own it. 6 acres, a house that needed work, a barn that needed more, a view of the mountains that needed nothing at all. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon in a real estate attorney's office, and then I drove to the property alone, parked in the gravel driveway, and I walked out to the middle of the 6 acres and I stood there in the March wind with the mountains ahead of me and the sky enormous overhead. I thought about Patricia's driveway and a laptop bag and go be great, baby. I thought about a 6-page story about an ocean made of rain. I thought about a letter in careful cursive that said, You were never small. I stood in the middle of my 6 acres, and I felt for the first time in my life the complete and uncomplicated sense of having arrived somewhere I had been working toward for a very long time. Not the destination. I understood enough now to know that there is no final destination, only the next honest step. But a place. A real, physical, deed-in-my-name place that was the material evidence of every year, every decision, every quiet refusal to stop. I stood there until the wind picked up and the light began to change. Then I took out my phone. I called my mother. Mama, I said when she picked up, I just bought a ranch property in Colorado. Silence. And then, her voice doing something I had not heard it do in a very long time, or perhaps ever in quite this way, she said, Oh, Sarah, baby, tell me everything.
I am telling you this story from my desk in Austin on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Outside my office window, the Texas live oaks are doing what they do in March, stubbornly, magnificently green, while everything around them is still deciding. The city is already warm. Someone in the building next door is playing music I can barely hear through the glass, just the rhythm of it, steady and unhurried. My team of 19 is in the next room, some in the office today, some remote, all of them working on something real. I can hear the particular sound of a workplace that is functioning, that low, productive hum of people focused on a shared purpose. And it still gives me something every morning, that sound. Something I don't have a precise word for. Gratitude, maybe. Or just the deep, settled satisfaction of having built a thing that works. I want to take a few minutes and tell you what I have learned. Not as advice. I am not a therapist or a life coach, and I am deeply suspicious of anyone who claims the messy particulars of their life translate cleanly into rules for yours. But as honest reflection, the kind I wish someone had offered me when I was 17 years old, sitting on a back porch watching the fireflies, deciding to stop asking for applause. The first thing I learned is this. Being capable is not the same as not needing to be seen. I was told implicitly and explicitly my entire childhood that because I was capable, because I got the grades, won the scholarship, managed my own path, I was therefore fine, self-sufficient, in no need of the investment and attention that was being directed generously and consistently elsewhere. This is one of the quietest and most enduring lies that capable people are told. Capability is a skill, a muscle, a trait even, a gift. It is not armor. It does not replace the need for acknowledgement, for being known, for having someone who loves you ask with real curiosity how you are doing and wait for the actual answer. If you are the capable one in your family, the one who handles things, manages things, who everyone assumes is fine, I want you to hear this clearly. You are allowed to need things. Your competence is not a trade you made in exchange for care. It is not a sign that you require less. It is just who you are, and who you are deserves to be seen. The second thing I learned: what you don't share cannot be used against you, but it also cannot connect you. I spent 4 years building a life in Austin without telling my family about it. And I want to be honest, part of that was self-protection, and the self-protection was understandable, even necessary given what I had learned about what happened when I shared my achievements in that house. But part of it was something less healthy, a withholding that had curdled over time into a kind of pride that isolated me, a refusal to be vulnerable that was protecting me from pain, but also from connection. My grandmother knew me because she reached for me and I let her. I wrote back to her letters. I shared things with her, real things, not the managed, minimal version I offered everyone else. And because I let her in, she could see me. And because she could see me, she could do what she did. The letter, the trust, that extraordinary final act of saying, I saw every single thing you did. If I had withheld from her the way I withheld from everyone else, I would have had neither.
Protect yourself. Yes, absolutely. Set your limits. Hold your boundaries. Understand who has earned what version of you. But don't let the protection become the whole structure. Leave some doors. The third thing, the debt was never about the money. When my mother called on that Wednesday evening and asked me to absorb $96,000 of Marcus's failed ventures, the request had almost nothing to do with money. It was about a story my family had been telling for 30 years, a story in which Marcus was the one who was invested in, struggled with, worried over, forgiven, and funded, and I was the one who managed on her own, and therefore could be called upon when management was required. Saying no to that request was not a financial decision. It was a narrative decision. It was me stepping out of a story that had been written for me before I was old enough to read it, and saying, I am not a supporting character in someone else's arc. I am not the family's contingency plan. I am not the ATM you remember exists when the account runs low. And the refusal, quiet, clear, without drama, was the most important sentence I ever said to my family. More important than the question I asked in the banquet hall. More important than the morning kitchen conversation with my mother. Because the question and the conversation were only possible because I had said no. Because I had drawn a line that told everyone, including myself, that I was a person with a center, not a resource with a name. The fourth thing, closure is not always a scene. Sometimes it is a Tuesday morning. I think we are told by stories, by movies, by the particular grammar of dramatic narratives that healing has an event, a confrontation, a tearful reconciliation, a moment of reckoning where someone finally says the right thing and the wound closes cleanly and everyone knows it happened because the music swells. My healing did not look like that. It looked like a recipe for blueberry pancakes read over the phone on a Tuesday evening. It looked like my father saying, "You've done something real there," in 5 plain words. It looked like Marcus saying, "I knew things weren't equal and I let it happen," and me saying, "We're at the beginning of okay," and both of us meaning it. It looked like standing in the middle of 6 acres in March wind, with the mountains ahead of me, alone, completely fine. Closure is not a door slamming shut. It is a series of small, honest moments that accumulate over time into a life that no longer needs the wound to make sense of itself. I want to say one more thing, and then I want to let you go. To anyone watching this who recognizes themselves in this story, who grew up being the capable one, the invisible one, the one whose achievements were expected and whose needs were assumed to be manageable, the one who drove to a parking lot and sat there for 11 minutes trying to remember how to breathe before walking into a room full of people who thought they knew you. You did not imagine it. The imbalance was real. The hunger to be seen was legitimate. The exhaustion of performing self-sufficiency for an audience that never questioned whether the performance was costing you something, that exhaustion was valid. And whatever you have built, whatever room you have carved out in the world, whatever competence or company or quiet life you have constructed in the spaces your family left empty, it is real. It counts. It is yours. You do not need anyone's retroactive approval to make it valid. You did not need permission to build it, and you do not need their applause to know its worth. My name is Sarah. I am 29 years old. I live in Austin, Texas. I built my life without anyone's permission, and I would not change a single quiet, necessary, mine alone year of it. Thank you for watching. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're the capable one in your family, the one everyone assumes is fine, leave a comment below. I see you.